John had lived alone for many years on his small ranch in the remote mountains. The land stretched for miles, covered with tall pines, rocky hills, and narrow streams that wound through the valleys. The nearest town was hours away by dirt road, and most people thought John had disappeared from the world. But he hadn't. He had chosen this life, far from noise, far from crowds, far from people. Every day John followed the same routine. Before dawn, he would check the fences around the pastures to make sure the cattle were safe. Then he would feed them, repair broken fences, and walk along the trails near the stream. Life had become simple, almost like a quiet rhythm he could rely on. He liked it that way. Silence was his only companion. Memories of his family, long gone, visited him often, but he had learned to live with them. Despite the peace, sometimes John felt a quiet emptiness. He missed the sound of laughter, the warmth of family, the simple conversations of neighbors. But he pushed these thoughts aside. He told himself he had everything he needed: land, animals, and the freedom to live as he wanted. One crisp autumn morning, John set out along the stream, carrying a small bag with tools and supplies. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows across the hills. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, and the stream glimmered with the first light of day. John had walked this path hundreds of times, yet each time it felt slightly different, alive in its own way. As he approached a narrow bend in the stream, he heard a strange sound. At first he thought it was the wind rustling through the trees. Then it came again, soft, faint, and human. A cry for help. John froze. No one ever came this far into the mountains. His heart beat faster. Could it be an injured animal? Or a lost hiker? He had to find out. He moved carefully, following the sound. The stream curved around a small cluster of rocks, and there, lying on the damp ground, were 3 young girls. They were dirty, covered in mud and trembling from the cold. Their clothes were torn, and they looked weak, almost lifeless. John felt a shock that pierced his chest. He had seen suffering before, but never like this. The girls looked like they had been wandering in the wilderness for days. Their eyes, wide and frightened, met his. For a moment, none of them spoke. The oldest, a girl of maybe 10 or 11, whispered something in a language John did not understand. The words were soft, like a prayer, but their meaning was clear. They were asking for help. Without thinking, John dropped his bag and rushed to them. He lifted the oldest first, cradling her in his strong arms. Her body was cold and she shivered violently. He wrapped her in his jacket, then went back for the other 2. Each one was lighter than he expected, but their weakness made the task difficult. By the time he had all 3 in his arms, John's clothes were wet and muddy, but he didn't care. All that mattered was that they survived. He carried them back to his ranch as quickly as he could. The journey was not easy. The path was narrow, slippery, and uneven. He stumbled several times, but each time he caught himself and the girls. He whispered words of encouragement, hoping his calm voice would reassure them. The youngest clutched his neck with tiny, weak hands, barely able to hold on. John felt a mix of fear and determination. He had never been responsible for anyone like this before, but he would not fail. When they finally reached the ranch house, John laid them carefully on old quilts he had spread on the floor. The girls were still shivering, their lips pale and their breathing shallow. John went into the kitchen and filled a pot with water, warming it over the stove. He mixed a little sugar into it and brought it to them slowly. The oldest girl sipped, her small hands trembling, but she drank. The middle girl followed, and finally the youngest, who was so weak she could barely lift the cup. John worked quietly, washing their faces with warm cloths and wrapping them in extra blankets. He didn't know what illnesses they might have or how long they had been exposed to the cold. All he knew was that they needed care, and he would give it to them with everything he had. As he worked, he glanced at the eldest girl. Her hair was tangled, her eyes were wide with fear, but there was also a glimmer of trust. She seemed to understand that he meant no harm. That small spark gave John hope. He had rescued them, but the real challenge was just beginning. He had to keep them alive, and he had to find out who they were and how they ended up in the mountains alone and almost dying. The rancher's heart, long hardened by years of solitude, began to soften. For the first time in many years, he felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything he had known since his family was gone. He whispered to himself, "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." Outside, the wind moved through the trees and the stream continued its quiet flow. Inside, John sat on the floor between the girls, holding them close, feeling the warmth return to their small bodies. The ranch was no longer just a place of solitude. It had become a sanctuary. For these 3 children, he was their only hope. And for John, they had awakened something he thought he had lost forever. A connection, a reason in the fragile but precious bond of trust. The sun rose higher, casting light across the ranch, and for the first time in many years, John did not feel alone. The ranch house, small and sturdy, had never felt so full of life. John had spent years in silence, but now it was filled with faint whispers, coughs, and the occasional shiver of 3 weak children. He moved carefully between them, checking each girl's condition. The eldest, who John had quietly started calling Maya, was alert enough to respond to his soft voice. The middle one, Lena, was still too weak to sit up without help, and the youngest, barely more than a toddler, clung to him constantly. John's hands were sore, his back ached, but he ignored it all. The girls' survival was all that mattered. For the first few hours, John simply watched over them, making sure they were warm and hydrated. He fed them small sips of warm water and soft bread, carefully avoiding anything that might upset their fragile stomachs. When Maya managed to speak a few words, he leaned closer, encouraging her. She whispered in her native language, but he did not understand. Still, the tone carried meaning. She was grateful and scared at the same time. John realized that survival was not just about food and warmth, it was also about trust. The girls had been through something terrible and they were wary of adults. Any sudden movement or loud sound could frighten them. So he moved slowly, spoke gently, and tried to create a safe space. Even the youngest girl, who he now called Nina, eventually allowed him to hold her without crying. Night fell, and the temperature dropped sharply. The small stove in the kitchen provided some warmth, but the ranch house was old and drafty. John piled blankets on the floor, creating a nest where all 3 could lie close together. He sat with them through the long night, listening to the wind outside and whispering comforting words. For hours, he simply held them, letting them know he would not leave. The next morning, John went outside to check the animals while keeping an eye on the girls through the window. He reflected on how fragile life could be. Just a few days ago, he had been completely alone, living a routine life with no interruptions. Now 3 little girls depended on him for every meal, every drop of water, every moment of safety. The thought was overwhelming, yet it awakened something he had not felt in a long time. A deep sense of responsibility. By the second day, the girls had regained a little strength. Maya could sit up and speak in broken phrases, pointing to objects around the house. Lena still needed help walking, and Nina could barely stand without support. John realized he needed more than just blankets and water. They needed proper care, and he had to improvise. He made a list of supplies, but the nearest store was hours away. For now, he worked with what he had: boiled water for cleanliness, bread, dried fruit, and any herbs he knew to soothe fevers. Communication was difficult. John did not speak their language, and they could only understand a few words in English. But over time, gestures, smiles, and gentle tones became a bridge. Maya began to understand that John would not harm them. She started helping care for her younger sisters, fetching water or soft blankets. Watching her take responsibility filled John with quiet admiration. Despite everything, the girl had an inner strength that gave him hope. Days passed slowly. John's own body ached from constant care, but he refused to leave their side. Each morning, he would carry Nina to the window so she could feel the sunlight and breathe fresh air. He sang softly to them, a song his mother used to sing when he was a child. The sound of music, simple and gentle, seemed to comfort them. Even Lena smiled faintly when he sang, a small sign that they were beginning to heal. John also faced challenges he had never imagined. Small injuries needed attention, and minor illnesses flared up in their weakened state. He had to clean scrapes carefully, monitor fevers, and keep them hydrated. One evening, Lena developed a high fever and John feared the worst. He stayed awake all night holding her, wiping sweat from her forehead and whispering that everything would be okay. Slowly, the fever subsided, and by morning, she was breathing easier. The relief was immense, yet John knew that each day was a battle. During this time, John reflected on their situation. How had 3 young girls ended up alone in the wilderness? Were they lost, or had something more dangerous happened? He did not know, and the thought worried him. But he could only act in the present. Right now, they needed warmth, care, and protection, He promised himself silently that he would not let anything happen to them while they were in his care. By the 5th day, the girls were strong enough to eat more substantial food and move around the small ranch house. Maya even helped John in small ways, carrying water or tidying blankets. Their trust in him had grown, and he began to see glimpses of their personalities. Maya was brave and determined, Lena was gentle and thoughtful, and Nina, though small, had a lively spirit that could not be contained. John realized that this experience was changing him as well. His long years of solitude had taught him self-reliance, but now he learned patience, compassion, and the power of human connection. These girls had awakened something in him he thought he had lost forever, a sense of purpose, a reason to care deeply for others again. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, John sat with the girls by the stove. They were wrapped in blankets, resting after a day of slow recovery. He watched them closely, seeing life return to their eyes and strength return to their bodies. For the first time in years, the ranch felt alive, filled with the quiet rhythm of life, laughter, and hope. John whispered softly, "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." The girls, though still weak, seemed to understand. Maya reached out and held his hand briefly, a small gesture that meant more than words ever could. John felt a warmth in his heart that had not been there in decades. The struggle was far from over, but for now they had survived another day. Outside, the mountains were quiet, the stream flowing steadily and the wind rustling through the trees. Inside, the ranch house, once silent and lonely, had become a place of care, trust, and slowly growing hope. John knew that challenges lay ahead. He still needed to seek proper help, and the girls' journey to full recovery was just beginning. But as he watched them sleep that night, he felt something he had almost forgotten. The quiet joy of saving lives, of being needed, and of finding connection where he had once thought there was only emptiness. For the first time in many years, John did not feel completely alone. By the 7th day, the girls had regained some strength, but they were still too weak to survive entirely on their own. John knew he could care for them for a little while, but he also understood that proper help, doctors, warmth, and nourishment was essential. The nearest town with a hospital was miles away, down winding dirt roads and through rough terrain. The thought of leaving his ranch carrying 3 children through the wilderness made him anxious. But he knew he had no choice. Their lives depended on it. Early one morning, John woke the girls gently. "We are going on a little trip," he said softly, though they did not understand all his words. Maya, sensing the seriousness in his tone, nodded slowly. She held Nina's hand tightly, whispering to her sisters in their own language. Lena looked at John with wide, trusting eyes. They were still afraid of the unknown, but the presence of John reassured them. John packed a small bag with food, blankets, and water. He tied the youngest securely in a sling across his chest, while he supported Lena with his arm. Maya, though slightly stronger, walked next to him, holding his hand and occasionally carrying a bundle of blankets. The journey would be difficult, but John was determined. He would not let them falter. The first few miles were manageable. The sun rose over the mountains, painting the trees and rocks in soft golden light. Birds chirped overhead, and the stream beside the trail glimmered like a silver ribbon. For a moment, the beauty of the wilderness felt comforting. The girls whispered to each other quietly, their voices soft but more confident than before. John felt a sense of hope, but he knew that danger could be around any bend. As they climbed a rocky slope, the trail became slippery. John's boot slipped several times on loose stones, and he cursed under his breath. The girls stumbled too, their small feet struggling to find solid ground. Each time John caught them, steadying their balance. Sweat ran down his forehead, but he pressed on, motivated by the thought of reaching safety. Midway through the journey, clouds began to gather, dark and heavy. Rain started to fall in light drizzles, quickly turning the trail into a slippery challenge. John wrapped the girls in extra blankets, using his jacket to shield them as best as he could. The youngest shivered against his chest, and John whispered reassurances. "We are almost there. Don't be afraid. I am with you." His voice, calm and firm, seemed to ease their fear, though their small hands clung to him tightly. The rain grew heavier. The trail became a river of mud, and the children's progress slowed. John could feel his strength waning, but he refused to stop. He took breaks only when necessary, letting the girls rest under the cover of large pine trees. During these pauses, he encouraged them with gentle smiles and soft words. Maya tried to comfort her sisters, holding Nina's hand and patting Lena's back. The small acts of kindness gave John hope. They were learning to care for each other even in the harshest conditions. As they continued, John noticed the stream beside the trail was rising. The rain had caused it to swell, and crossing it became dangerous. He looked for a safe spot, but options were limited. He found a shallow section where rocks broke the current and carefully led the girls across one by one. Nina, too frightened to move alone, clung to him tightly. The water rushed around their legs, cold and fast, but they made it across safely. John felt a surge of relief and quietly praised the girls for their courage. By late afternoon, exhaustion set in. Their clothes were soaked, their bodies weary, but they still had a few miles to go. John scanned the horizon and saw a thin wisp of smoke rising in the distance, a sign of civilization. Hope surged in his heart. The hospital, warmth, and safety were near. He encouraged the girls with soft words and gentle gestures, guiding them with care through the final stretch. When they finally reached the edge of the town, people stared in surprise. A man carrying 3 wet and tired children through the rain was an unusual sight. John explained briefly, pointing to the children and gesturing to their condition. A kind passerby quickly led them to a nearby clinic, where doctors rushed to assess the girls. John watched anxiously as the children were taken inside, wrapped in warm blankets and examined for injuries and illness. The doctors worked efficiently, checking their vitals, giving fluids, and tending to minor cuts and bruises. Maya, Lena, and Nina began to show signs of recovery under proper care. John, standing outside in the rain, felt a wave of relief wash over him. The struggle had been long and dangerous, but they had survived. His own exhaustion faded in the face of their safety. As he waited, John reflected on the journey. The mountains, the rain, the slippery trails all had tested him, but he had pressed on. He thought of the girls' bravery, their trust in him, and the small ways they had helped each other. The experience had changed him, just as it had changed them. He had entered the mountains a solitary rancher, and now he had become a protector, a guardian, and a bridge between the wilderness and safety. When the girls were stable and wrapped in warm blankets, John finally allowed himself to smile. Maya looked at him, her small eyes bright, and whispered a word he could not understand. But the meaning was clear: gratitude, relief, trust. Nina reached out and held his hand briefly, and Lena leaned against him for comfort. In that moment, John knew the bond they shared was unbreakable. That night, after ensuring the girls were comfortable and under proper care, John walked through the town to find a quiet place to rest. His body ached from the journey, his clothes were soaked and muddy, but his heart was full. He had faced the dangers of the wilderness, the fear of the unknown, and the weight of responsibility, and he had succeeded. The girls were safe, and for the first time in many years, John felt a sense of peace he had not known since his family's passing. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle, and the moon peeked through the clouds. The mountains, once filled with silence and solitude, were now a place of memory, a reminder of courage, trust, and human connection. John knew that challenges lay ahead, that the girls would need time to heal fully, and that questions about their journey remained unanswered. But for now, they were alive, together, and safe. As he sat under a small tree near the clinic, John whispered to himself, "We made it. You are safe. That is what matters." The weight of years alone began to lift from his shoulders. He had faced the wilderness, faced fear, and faced uncertainty, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and connected to life once more. The girls had survived, and John had discovered something he thought he had lost forever: the quiet strength of compassion, the courage of the human spirit, and the joy of helping others when it mattered most. The clinic was a warm and safe place, a stark contrast to the cold, wet mountains they had just crossed. The 3 girls lay on clean beds, wrapped in soft blankets, their small bodies finally free from the chill that had nearly claimed them. John stayed close, sitting quietly in a chair beside them. His arms ached from the journey, and his clothes were still damp. But his focus was entirely on the girls. The doctors and nurses worked carefully, checking their vital signs, treating minor injuries, and giving them nourishing meals. They marveled at the girls' resilience, noting how close they had come to serious danger. John watched as the youngest, Nina, finally smiled for the first time in days. The simple gesture warmed his heart. Even though she could barely speak, the trust she showed in letting him sit nearby and hold her hand told him more than words ever could. Maya, the eldest, began to speak a little more each day. She told small stories in broken English, pointing to her sisters and describing their journey through the mountains in bits and pieces. John listened attentively, piecing together their experience. They had wandered away from a distant settlement, separated from their family, and had survived only by relying on each other. Their courage amazed him. Despite the fear, hunger, and exhaustion, they had kept moving, guided by hope. Lena, the middle sister, still weak but growing stronger each day, began to sit up without assistance. She helped Maya fetch small items from the bedside table and even tried to brush Nina's hair. These small acts of care showed the bond between the sisters and reminded John of the importance of family, even one formed in extraordinary circumstances. As the days passed, John began to talk with the girls more, learning small words in their language while teaching them English. It was slow and sometimes frustrating, but every smile, every successful word felt like a victory. John found himself marveling at how resilient children could be. Even after all they had endured, they laughed quietly at little things. The sound of a nurse's voice, the flutter of a bird outside the window, or the funny shapes clouds made in the sky. During this time, John also began interacting with the local community. The clinic staff helped him contact the Apache community, and soon, family members arrived. The reunion was emotional. Tears flowed freely as the girls were embraced by relatives who had feared the worst. John stood quietly at the edge, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. He had grown attached to the children, and while he knew they belonged with their family, letting go was harder than he had imagined. Despite the bittersweet emotions, the experience left a lasting impact on John. He had spent years alone, convinced that life in solitude was all he could manage, but caring for the girls had awakened something within him, a sense of purpose, a deep compassion, and the understanding that even one person could make a significant difference in the life of others. The girls' recovery continued steadily. Maya helped her sisters get dressed, held their hands as they walked in small circles around the clinic room, and even helped John with simple chores when he visited. Lena's health improved and she began laughing more freely, a sound that filled the sterile clinic with warmth. Nina, though the smallest and most fragile, gradually gained confidence, exploring her surroundings with the cautious curiosity of a child, learning to trust the world again. John spent long hours sitting with them, listening, watching, and sharing stories of his own childhood. He spoke of the mountains, the animals on his ranch, and the quiet beauty of the streams. He avoided frightening tales, instead focusing on moments of wonder and simple joys. The girls listened, rapt, sometimes asking questions he struggled to answer, but the effort mattered more than perfect words. Slowly, the bond between them grew deeper. They were no longer just survivors of a dangerous journey. They were a small family, united by trust, care, and shared experience. One afternoon, John helped the girls move to a larger room where they could play safely. He watched as Maya and Lena helped Nina climb onto a small chair, laughing when she nearly toppled over. John's eyes softened, the weight of years of loneliness easing from his heart. The girls' laughter was a sound he had forgotten existed, and it filled him with a quiet joy. As the week drew to a close, the Apache community began asking questions about the girls' journey and the man who had rescued them. John spoke humbly, recounting the events without exaggeration. He explained how he had found them by the stream, carried them to his ranch, and kept them alive until proper help arrived. The community listened with awe, expressing gratitude that went beyond words. John, though proud of the role he had played, felt that it was the girls' courage that had truly saved them. He had only guided them. Their determination had carried them through. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a soft pink, John sat by the window with Maya, Lena, and Nina. They were wrapped in blankets, resting after a day of play and light activity. John thought about the journey, the cold, the rain, the treacherous trails, and the fear in their eyes when he first found them. It had been a difficult and exhausting experience, but it had also been a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit. Maya reached out and touched John's hand. Her eyes, wide and sincere, seemed to say more than words could express. She didn't need to speak. The connection between them was clear. He had been their protector when the world felt dangerous. their source of warmth when the cold threatened to overwhelm them, and their guide when fear had clouded their path. And in return, they had brought life back into his world, a world that had been empty for far too long. John knew that soon the girls would return fully to their family and community. The thought was bittersweet. He had grown attached to them, but he also understood the importance of family and belonging. His role had been crucial, but he had also helped them reconnect with their true home. As he watched them sleep that night, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had saved lives, given hope, and rediscovered the strength of human connection. The experience had changed John. No longer was he the lonely rancher who spent his days in silence. He had learned patience, compassion, and the quiet power of caring for others. The girls' bravery, trust, and laughter had brought light back into his life. And while he would return to his ranch eventually, he would never forget the small hands that clung to him, the whispered words of trust, and the bond that had formed in the wilderness. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees and the stars began to appear in the night sky. Inside, the girls slept peacefully, safe at last. John sat quietly, reflecting on the journey they had all endured. The struggle, the fear, and the danger had been immense, but so had the reward. They had survived, and in doing so, they had healed more than just their bodies. They had healed his heart, too. The morning sun streamed through the clinic windows, painting the room in soft gold. The girls were awake and lively, their small voices filling the space with chatter and laughter. Maya stretched, yawning as she looked around while Lena and Nina played quietly with a small toy John had brought from his ranch. The transformation was remarkable. From the frightened, near-lifeless children he had found by the stream, they had grown strong, healthy, and full of curiosity again. John watched them with a quiet smile, his heart full. It had been weeks since the girls had arrived at the clinic, and every day had been a step toward recovery. But now the time had come for them to return to their family and community. The Apache elders had arrived early that morning, ready to take the girls back. They had tears in their eyes, gratitude and relief shining through every gesture. The reunion was emotional. Maya ran into the arms of a woman who looked much like her mother, crying and holding her tightly. Lena followed, and then Nina, clinging for a moment to John before letting go. John stood to the side, feeling a mixture of pride, sadness, and relief. He had cared for them, protected them, and guided them to safety. And now he would let them go, knowing they were finally where they belonged. The elders spoke to John through a translator, expressing thanks that seemed almost endless. They praised his courage, his dedication, and the careful attention he had given to the girls. John listened quietly, shaking his head. He did not see himself as a hero. He had only done what anyone should have done in that moment. Yet the gratitude of the community warmed him in a way he had not felt in years. After the hugs, the tears, and the whispered words of thanks, John stepped outside. The air smelled of pine and sunlight, and the mountains stretched endlessly in the distance. For a moment he felt the familiar loneliness return, but then he remembered the laughter, the whispered words of trust, and the small hands that had once clung to him for safety. They had changed him. They had reminded him of the importance of connection, of caring for others, and of finding purpose beyond oneself. Maya ran back briefly, holding out a small handmade bracelet. She slipped it onto John's wrist, her small fingers lingering for a moment. "For you," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with meaning. John felt a lump in his throat. The simple gift was more valuable than anything money could buy. It was a symbol of trust, love, and the bond they had shared through their journey. As the girls walked away with their family, John watched, feeling both pride and a quiet ache. He had been alone for so long, and yet, through these 3 children, he had discovered the strength of human connection. He realized that even brief encounters could leave a lasting impact. Their courage, resilience, and trust had reminded him of what it meant to care, to protect, and to hope. Returning to his ranch, John felt the familiar silence of the mountains, but it was no longer empty. He remembered the sound of their laughter, the way Maya had taken responsibility for her sisters, Lena's gentle smiles, and Nina's lively curiosity. The mountains, the streams, and the forests had been the stage for their struggle, but the real story had been the bonds they formed and the lives they had touched. Back at his ranch, John resumed his daily routines, but something had changed. He moved with a renewed sense of purpose, tending to his animals and land with a quiet joy that had been missing for years. He often thought of the girls, wondering how they were doing, hoping they were safe and happy. He also stayed in touch with the Apache community, sharing occasional news and checking in from time to time. John's life, once defined by isolation, had been transformed by a simple act of courage and care. He had discovered that even in solitude one could make a difference, save lives, and create lasting connections. The experience had shown him that strength was not just in surviving alone, but in helping others survive and thrive. Sometimes, in the evenings, John would walk along the stream near his ranch, imagining the girls playing in the sunlight, their laughter echoing in his memory. He smiled quietly, knowing that the world was brighter for having them in it, and for having him care for them when they needed it most. In the quiet of the mountains, surrounded by the animals he loved and the land he cherished, John felt peace. The fear, sadness, and loneliness that had defined his life for so long had been replaced by hope, gratitude, and the quiet knowledge that even a single person's courage could change the course of lives. Though he would remain alone in the physical sense, John was no longer truly alone. The girls had left a mark on his heart that time could not erase. They had reminded him of the power of trust, compassion, and human resilience, and in that he found a lasting sense of connection, a purpose renewed and a heart restored. The sun set behind the mountains, casting golden light across the ranch. The stream flowed gently as if carrying the memories of their journey. And John, the once lonely rancher, felt something he had not felt in years, a quiet, deep joy. He had found life, connection, and hope in the most unexpected way, and it would remain with him forever.